In 2012, the first entry in the Strange Men anthology, The Crooked Man, was released. A few weeks ago, I took a look at it. It had some game design issues, but was overall an incredible narrative experience. In 2014, the second installment, The Sandman, was released to the public. This time, you control a different protagonist. Let's take a look at the wiki's synopsis. A girl named Sophie Grundler suffers from insomnia. No matter what she tries, she's unable to fall asleep. One night, she notices something odd going on with all the clocks and the town itself. She discovers that the Sandman, a fairy who controls everyone's sleeping patterns, has decided to put the whole world to sleep forever. Now, she's the only one who can stop him. This is decidedly more lighthearted sounding than the previous game's story, where a man who struggled so much that he decided to take his own life was simultaneously tormenting someone and calling out for help beyond the grave. Nevertheless, it's still labeled as a psychological horror game. This time around, the game has 6 endings. 4 bad, 2 good. Although one of each ending type is part of a bonus chapter. I'll make sure to cover each ending and how to get them. Now, I think it's about time we got started. I'm quaking. You play as Sophie Grundler, a 17-year-old high school student who hasn't slept in 10 days. Her father is rarely home, staying at work for long periods of time. She has only one friend at her school, Anne, who refuses to step in as Sophie is bullied daily for the color of her hair by a girl named Reagan. Sophie is given a tip from one of the teachers at her school to try and pray before bed, which she decides to try out that night. She lays down, closing her eyes but not managing to fall asleep. Suddenly, something feels off. She opens her eyes and glances at the clock, noticing that it's frozen at midnight. She stands up, noticing that her desk clock is stuck at midnight as well. A loud snore can be heard from the hall, coming from her next-door neighbor. Sophie calls the police, concerned that he must have fallen and knocked himself out, but the call doesn't connect. The door to his apartment is unlocked, so Sophie runs inside to ask his wife for help, only to find her unconscious on the ground as well. Sophie walks outside, finding the streets laden with dozens of sleeping citizens. The environments are a major step up from The Crooked Man. This truly feels like a world instead of a string of levels. She walks to the town's central park, running into David. For those who don't know, David is the protagonist of the previous game, The Crooked Man. Realizing that there's a chance that others are awake as well, they decide to go around and look. David wants to stick with Sophie to make sure she's safe, but she brushes him off, insisting that she'll be fine on her own. Sophie heads to her school to try and find Anne, who lives in the dorms. Using a ladder to climb the wall and shattering the door with a shovel, she enters the building and begins her hunt. Anne is cowering behind a statue in the school's chapel. Sophie explains the situation and insists that Anne follow her to meet David. Anne talks about how she was being chased and doesn't want it to happen again. Unfortunately for them, 4 red ghosts surround Anne, antagonizing her and calling her a liar. The ghosts go on and on about Anne being a no-good liar, grabbing her and taking her away. Sophie roams the halls, listening to the ghosts and doing the exact opposite of what they say to find Anne in the kitchen storeroom. Ghosts surround her, still berating her and calling her a liar. Sophie defends Anne, but Anne panics, shoving her best friend to the floor and fleeing. Sophie runs out of the school in pursuit, but Anne is nowhere to be seen. We see a flashback of the friends in the school library. Anne is apologizing for never stepping in to stop Reagan, admitting that she's too scared. In the town's North Park, Sophie meets back up with David. He had no luck finding anyone else, so they split back up and continue the search. Sophie breaks into the local mall, walking up to the top floor where a theater is located. Inside, Reagan has been tied up by dozens of what appear to be soldiers. She's set for a public execution in 30 minutes' time. As much as Sophie dislikes her, she can't just stand by and watch someone die. Sophie frees Reagan, but Reagan starts whining about wanting her mother and not wanting to escape and risk getting hurt. We get another flashback, this time of the girls while they were younger, spending time at a park. Reagan's parents are fighting, so she ran to the park out of fear. Sophie talks to her about how her mom was killed by a bank robber, but she can't cry about it because it'll make things harder for her dad. She tells Reagan that she shouldn't be a crybaby and should just play with her until her parents stop. This somehow works, and the two form a friendship. Sophie uses this memory to light a fire under Reagan. Using the power of a cardboard box, they Metal Gear Solid shuffle through the mall and manage to escape. The duo step outside, but some of the soldiers notice them and continue chasing. Sophie runs as fast as she can, not worrying to check if Reagan was still following. When she turns around to find herself alone, she immediately runs back to the park in the hope that David will be there to help look for Reagan. David calms her down, talking about the time they first met. In another flashback, we see Reagan having stolen Sophie's lunch money. You know, a crime. Sophie is starving, so on the way home she grabs some ice cream. Unfortunately, she and David smack into each other and she drops her treat. David profusely apologizes, asking if she's okay and offering to pay for it. David takes her to a cafe down the road for some cake as an apology. Sophie realizes that it's been a long time since she ate out with someone and begins to cry. This prompts her to open up to David and talk for a while, about Reagan and Anne. Sophie thanks him, and they agree that if she ever needs to talk again, they would meet at the cafe. Back in present day, Sophie agrees to go try and find her father at his workplace. She asks if there's anyone important that David wants help looking for. He says no, which is quite strange considering the fact that as of the last game, he's engaged. Sophie finds this odd as well. I should probably mention that I've been solving some puzzles up to this point. They've been so basic that there hasn't really been a lot of room to talk about them. For example, to get to Mr. Grundler's workplace, we need a keycard. You walk around town until you find the employee of the month from the wall in the lobby behind the locked gate. Put the present time into the numpad to unlock it, and you take his keycard. He sounds like plastic bottles. That's basically every puzzle so far. You need something, you find it in a random location, you use it. Sophie enters the building and finds her dad's desk. There's a really old photo of herself on it, prompting a flashback to Mr. Grundler overworking himself when Sophie was a child. It was severe enough that he tore a hole in his stomach, coughing up blood and collapsing. In the hospital, Sophie's aunt sits there actively bad-mouthing Sophie's mere existence, declaring that her brother should have put her up for adoption the second his wife died. The second she realizes Sophie is there, she puts on her child-friendly mask while everyone playing the game simultaneously raises their middle finger to the screen. Sophie continues to climb the building until she finds her father, who's screaming for her to run. What has him so riled up? Oh! The duo run for their lives through the burning building, with Mr. Grundler tripping and falling in the entrance. A blast pushes Sophie through the front door, away from her father. When she re-enters to try and save him, everything is as it was before the dragon appeared. Father nowhere to be found. Sophie is starting to think that this is all just a terrible nightmare. She even lost a tooth in that blast. Sophie heads to the Central Park, but David isn't here yet. A shadow of what appears to be a unicorn is on the side of the screen, walking away. Sophie follows it into an apartment building. Inside is David's fiancée, Shirley, sound asleep. Sophie walks into a side room and starts to panic as she sees something on the couch. Back in the Central Park, Sophie returns to find David waiting for her. This is Lullaby, a being created by the Sandman, a fairy that helps put people to sleep. Lullaby goes around indulging fantasies to help serenade an active mind to rest. But how is any of what happened tonight going to put Sophie to rest? Well, think about it. Doesn't Sophie want Anne to be ostracized as a liar for not standing up for her friend? For pretending to care? Doesn't Sophie want the girl that she hates so very much to be publicly executed? Or for the workplace that takes her father away from her day after day to burn to the ground? These were all Sophie's fantasies, whether she accepts that fact or not. Sophie demands to know where the Sandman is. He put everyone into an eternal sleep, and now she wants to bring them all back. Lullaby was created for her, so he takes her by the hand and brings her to where the Sandman lives. Sophie walks alone in a mysterious forest with Lullaby nowhere to be seen. It's relatively empty with a singular tower next to a swamp. There was a jump scare here when I walked past the water that is hands down the worst jump scare I've gotten on this channel to date. I'll turn down the volume. This is a trivial trial and error puzzle. You have to hug the far side to survive. The creature that attacked is named Nixie. She refuses to let Sophie pass unless she pays her. Sophie returns to the tower and finds the Tooth Fairy, who looks like a Simpsons character. He agrees to give her the money in exchange for a tooth, but only that of a child. Nixie previously made remarks about dew from Tibyong grass, which brings youth, so Sophie finds some and uses it on her tooth from the crash to revert it into a baby tooth. The Tooth Fairy accepts her tooth, she gives the coin to Nixie, and she moves through the woods once again. Nearby is an incredibly small castle. This is probably my least favorite puzzle in the game. This castle belongs to the Sandman. It is the only location you can go to, as there is only a lake to the right. In the field to your left, there is a log that shrinks you when you crawl through it. See where this is going, right? Grab the log, put it in front of the castle, walk right in. But no, you aren't allowed to move the log, and you can't walk that distance as someone so tiny. The only way to progress here is to backtrack to Nixie, ask her about the house, then move the log over once you've learned that it belongs to the Sandman. The castle is the only place left to go, so you already have the motivation to enter it. I don't know why you had to go back and talk to Nixie. For now, let's just head inside. The castle is empty as Sophie enters. There's a puzzle in the hallway that she immediately disables, and an even longer hallway after that one. After trying the door at the end, it's locked, and Sophie turns back. As she walks away, a man walks out. This is the Sandman, and he is not scary. It's a little old dude with a spoon and bloodshot eyes. He's really more goofy looking than anything. I think this design makes more and more sense as the game goes on, but for now it feels really out of place. We hear the story of the Sandman as told by Sophie's mother. Supposedly, the Sandman doesn't like children that stay up, so he grabs a spoon and scoops out their eyes to make them into stew. Great story to tell a kid trying to fall asleep, Miss Grundler. Sophie tends to value her eyes, so she books it out of the room. Unfortunately, the castle's door has been covered, and Sophie is cornered by the Sandman. She's restrained at a dinner table and offered some food, including a bowl of soup with eyeballs in it. Foggy creatures surround her, chanting for her to eat up. Sophie half-heartedly apologizes and refuses to eat any, prompting the Sandman to leave the room. Sophie talks to these foggy creatures. They reveal themselves to be the dust of the house. They're the Sandman's helpers who help clean up his sleeping sand. Sophie returns to the hall where the chase began, finding 2 notes in a language she can't read. Lullaby is in a nearby room. Sophie freaks out about how she was almost killed and forced to eat weird food. Sophie asks about the story she heard as a child. Lullaby is very clear that mothers all around the world tell ridiculous stories to get their noisy kids to sleep. I still think this story would prevent kids from sleeping, but it would certainly shut them up. The Sandman does not eat the eyes of children, but he still could have killed Sophie. Fairy food is poisonous to humans, so Lullaby doesn't know why the Sandman would offer it to her. Lullaby tells Sophie to be careful walking around the house as there are traps. For reasons. Not suspicious at all. Lullaby reads the notes for Sophie. One has a recipe for sleeping sand, while the other tells the reader to put out the emerald flames after use. Sophie heads north, ducking and weaving her way through a hallway of fire-breathing statues. At the end of the hall is the previously aforementioned emerald flames. They turn off at the pull of a lever, deactivating the trapped hallway. Next is a room full of invisible walls. After some trial and error, Sophie makes her way through the maze. In the room to the left, there's a bottle of red liquid which Sophie uses to mark the path back. It's a good thing too, since the Sandman is in the room to the left and begins another chase. Sophie runs through the maze and dodges left, tricking the Sandman into falling through the hole where the emerald flames used to reside. Sophie finds a room showing the globe. This is what the Sandman uses to send sleeping sand all over the world. There's a mirror on a nearby table that you can use to teleport around the Sandman's house for easy transportation. To the left is a mirrored room, where your controls are literally mirrored as you go through a maze. At the end is Lullaby drinking some tea, as well as a statue. The statue begins to sing, making Sophie instantly tired. But if Sophie falls asleep, nobody can wake the world back up. Sophie does all that she can to stay awake. She bangs her head into the statue, dunks her head in a bucket of water, blasts loud music from her phone, and screams out the nearby windows at the top of her lungs. Nothing works, but Lullaby steps in to stop the singing, albeit begrudgingly. Sophie begs for a way to stop the Sandman, with Lullaby redirecting her towards a creature known as Unicorn. Unicorn is the reason that the Sandman set up traps all over the house. Unicorn is the one that led Sophie to David's apartment, revealing Lullaby's true identity. Unicorn resides at the lake east of the castle, but Lullaby warns Sophie to be careful. He's a troublemaker and has a thing for cute girls. Sophie introduces herself to Unicorn, who offers to tell her how to defeat the Sandman in exchange for a pink jewel. If she returns without a pink jewel, Unicorn will run her through with his horn. Back in the castle, a painting has fallen off the wall, revealing a line of 8 jewels. To the left of the invisible maze, a room requires a very similar looking code to open. Putting the jewels in the same order as the ones behind the painting, Sophie unlocks the room. Inside is a stick, lots of sand, and an assortment of drawers with a cabinet in the corner. Sophie grabs the stick in an empty sack, but she hears the Sandman approaching. Sophie hides in the cabinet. The Sandman looks at her but walks away without doing anything. Maybe he didn't see her? Sophie uses her stick to break the glass in the maze, blocking her from a nearby staircase. Inside are several colored jewels, but the pink one seems odd. It's actually a clear jewel painted pink, which would certainly get Sophie killed. She grabs a note from the wall and retreats to the tea room to have Lullaby read it. Supposedly, the machine next to the note can extract jewels from people's minds. The game never elaborates on these jewels or their meanings, but the pink jewel has an important role in the remainder of the game. Specifically, Sophie's jewel, as she uses the machine to extract it and give it to Unicorn. In exchange for the jewel, Sophie receives a limp stone, which makes you go limp when you touch it. Sophie justifiably wonders how this is supposed to be of any use since she cannot hold the stone without going limp. Unicorn tells her to bring it to Dwarf so he can make it into something she can use. He lives in the cave to the west. Sophie bags up the stone and starts going towards the cave. As it turns out, Unicorn just wanted to see the jewel, not keep it, and you're given an option. Allow him to keep the jewel or take it back. This seemingly inconsequential choice completely alters the game's ending. If you let him keep it, you have the opportunity to get bad ending 1 and good ending 1. If you take it back, you can only get bad ending 2 and 3. I personally made one save file for each path. I'll explain how to get each ending as we draw closer to the end. Sophie arrives at the cave, but it's pitch dark. Dwarf notes that it's too dark for Sophie and politely asks her to grab the cage by the door and collect the glimmers in the field to her left to use as a light source. This is a really easy segment. You just run up to each of them and hit Z. Now that Sophie has all 10, she returns to the cave. Dwarf is revealed to be quite scary looking, but he's a genuinely wonderful guy. He wonders how the Unicorn got his hands on something so valuable, and happily offers to turn it into something that Sophie can use. As he works, the two get to talking. I think this entire conversation is really sweet, so I'm just going to show you the whole thing. This is such a good interaction. I love how kind and understanding Dwarf is, and a lot of things start to make sense about Sophie's interactions with David, including why she freaked out a bit after Lullaby called her cute in passing. It's not because it was Lullaby, it's because Lullaby had taken the form of David. Dwarf gifts Sophie a wand that when swung will have the same effect as the stone. Dwarf asks to see her hands for a moment. He remarks that even though he cannot see her, Sophie reminds him of her mother. That's right, Dwarf is blind. He also seems to know Miss Grundler, but that also may be a translation error since Sophie didn't really react to it. Apparently, all of the fairies are hard workers to a fault, to the point where they neglect to take care of themselves. That's why the Tooth Fairy has such damaged teeth, and why the Sandman's eyes are so bloodshot. Sophie comments about her father overworking himself in years past, with Dwarf reminding her to treat him with kindness. He's the only dad that she has. He wishes her good luck and says he'll pray for her success in taking down the Sandman. Sophie thanks him. Dwarf is hands down my favorite character in this game. He's such a thoughtful and soft-spoken man that completely defies what Sophie first thought of him. She screamed when she saw his face, yet the first thought he had was to make sure that she was okay and apologize for spooking her before offering to help make the wand. What an incredibly kind and understanding person. Sophie returns to the castle, only to find the Sandman at the top of the stairs. He looks at her for a moment before turning red with pure rage. Before Sophie can run away, he bolts past her. Upon backtracking, the unicorn has a massive injury on his head. It seems the Sandman had a different target this time. Sophie finds that one of the statues in the Hall of Flames has been knocked over, trapping some dust. Using her stick as a lever to lift it upright, Sophie frees the dust, who gives her some glasses in return. They're the Sandman's glasses, used for reading anything in any language. They make Sophie look like the sisters from Johnny Test. The trapdoor has opened in the map room, leading to a mysterious key. For now, it's time to make some sleeping sand. Sophie gathers the ingredients from across the map. The key from earlier unlocks a door in the singing statue room, revealing a lab for making sand. Sophie puts on some special gloves to carry flames over to the cauldron. She grinds up a snora fruit into powder before putting it and some crygel fluid into the cauldron. When it turns blue, she adds the catter lizard tail and uses a bowl to transfer the concoction to the machine to her left. At the press of a button, the sand is generated and Sophie puts it in the sack from earlier. But before we start getting endings, there's another room we should look at. Using the gloves from earlier, Sophie grabs the emerald flames and lights the candles from one of the rooms that used to contain a note. This reveals a hidden staircase to the Sandman's room. There are beds, paintings, a telescope that can see the world, and a diary. Privacy's for nerds, so Sophie throws on the glasses and takes a peek inside the diary. Inside, we learn that the Sandman has gone centuries without sleep. In this universe, the world used to be flat, so night would fall all at the same time. But now that it's a globe, the Sandman has done nothing but work. When one part of the world is sleeping, another part is awake. If the Sandman sleeps, the humans will be sleepless. Pushed to the brink of his exhaustion, the Sandman created eternal sleeping sand and put the world to sleep. Unfortunately, many humans were still unaffected, those with unease, anger, and sorrow. The Sandman created Lullaby then, to help the humans get the eternal sleep they deserve. He believes all humans have the right to be happy as they sleep, to have a peaceful slumber. A new entry speaks of Unicorn bringing Sophie to this world. He speaks very positively towards her. He truly wants to find a way to send her into the peaceful sleep she deserves. Lullaby walks in, no longer taking the form of David. They talk. The Sandman has no ill will towards humanity. He takes his work incredibly seriously. Even though he desperately needs sleep, he couldn't bear to leave the humans sleepless like he has been for so very long. Sophie begins to cry, realizing how horrible this situation truly is. She doesn't know what to do. She wants the Sandman to get sleep, but she also doesn't want to be asleep forever. Lullaby encourages her to do what feels right. Sophie leaves, finding a note in the hall from the Sandman in English. He has created a special sleeping sand specifically for Sophie to finally cure her insomnia. He states that he is at the top of the castle and hopes she won't run away. He warns her of the holes in the stairs and asks her to take care not to injure herself on the way up. The last thing he would ever want is to hurt someone else. Sophie begins her ascent. The Sandman is waiting for her on the roof. Sophie expresses her sympathy for him, but tells him that she does not want to sleep forever, initiating the boss fight. Sophie uses the wand to paralyze the Sandman while he throws the sleeping sand at her. When he has 10 hit points remaining, you are given a limited time to act. Here, I'll be going through the endings in chronological order and finishing with the good one. For the first bad ending, Sophie hits the Sandman one last time, killing him. For the second bad ending, we're switching to the save file where Sophie took her jewel back. This time, when Sophie enters the Sandman's room, she has a different reaction to the diary, and Lullaby still assumes the form of David. Sophie gets the same letter, initiates the boss, and kills the Sandman. This is where things go differently. When the Sandman gets to 10 health, Sophie takes out the sleeping sand she created and uses it on him. We're now switching back to the original save file where Unicorn kept Sophie's jewel. As with Bad End 3, she uses the sleeping sand at 10 hit points. The developer, Uri, really knows how to wrap up a story. I always get emotional at the end of these, and I think this story was just as good as The Crooked Man. It had a much lighter tone, but it worked really well to create a beautiful story. I didn't feel too much of a connection towards a lot of the characters in The Crooked Man, but this one had really likable ones. I love how goofy the Sandman is and how he had communication issues. I love Sophie trying to figure herself out and coming to terms with heartbreak for the first time while learning to stand up for herself. And I think I made it pretty clear earlier on how much I love Dwarf. To end things off, this game has a bonus scenario where you get to play through the same story, but as the Sandman, which we absolutely need to take a look at. It even has 2 extra endings. The Sandman is jolted awake by an alarm going off. The people of the world need sleep, and it's his time to shine. Over and over again, he sends sleeping sand all across the world, goes to sleep, and is woken seconds later by another alarm in a new place. Finally, he can't take it anymore. The Sandman talks to Dwarf about putting humanity to sleep. The Sandman built a time-stopping machine to prevent the humans from dying. Dwarf wishes him well on his sleep journey, and the Sandman begins scribbling down some notes. He keeps track of all the things he needs to do, which is how we progress the game in this section. The Sandman gets peachy tree leaves, swamp water, and truants to make a special kind of sleeping sand. The Sandman boils the swamp water, adding sliced truants and ground peachy tree leaves to create an eternal sleeping sand to get some shut-eye. But before he can go to sleep, word comes out that some people are still awake. The Sandman vows to help them, to make it so that the sadness and pain that resides within them recedes just enough for them to get some rest. He creates Lullaby and waits for an update in the tea room. Lullaby returns in the form of David, describing the situation with Sophie. The Sandman comments on how David looks so grown up, but for now, that's unimportant. It's time to welcome Sophie by making a delicious meal. It seems that this drowsy fairy has forgotten that fairy food is poisonous to humans. The Sandman finds Sophie roaming the halls, but they can't understand each other. She runs, and the Sandman gives chase. He has a delicious meal for her after all. The music in the background of this entire extra scene is so perfect. It's goofy and upbeat and innocent, and it just reminds me of some of the more upbeat tracks from Animal Crossing. It's perfect. After her refusal to eat, the Sandman is assured by the Dusk that Sophie is just tired and that his cooking is wonderful. Here, he accidentally drops his recipe memo. He and Sophie soon cross paths again, but she runs away in fear. A chase begins, but the Sandman overshoots his target, falling into the Emerald Flame Pit and dropping a key onto a bed of plants. He finds her hiding in a closet, but decides not to bother her. The Dust assures him that there's no way she's scared of him. They soon get news that the unicorn has requested a pink jewel from Sophie, but the Sandman gave his only pink jewel back to its owner, which is very bad as the unicorn threatened to kill Sophie if she returned without it. The Sandman quickly paints a clear jewel pink, thinking that unicorn would never notice. Time passes, and the Sandman decides to make sure that Sophie is alright after her encounter. He notices that her head is missing its pink jewel and becomes enraged, taking the jewel back and beating the hell out of Unicorn. On his way back, the Sandman runs into Dwarf, who wants to have a chat. Dwarf explains why Sophie has been so afraid of him, with the chases and the fact that their food is poisonous to humans. Dwarf tells him to communicate his intentions clearly to her, so they can come to an understanding. Unfortunately, the Sandman doesn't know English. He offers the Tooth Fairy some terabit eye soup in exchange for some coins. He travels to the human world to pick up an English study book. He drops the money in the cash register and returns to his room. Using his glasses and the book, he crafts a note for Sophie. Finally, we arrive at the endings. To get the bad ending, the Sandman has to win the fight. To get the final good ending, the Sandman needs to lose the battle and fall asleep. This game was great. The controls were honed in, so I never overshot my targets like I did in The Crooked Man. The story was consistently really well done, and everything about the art was greatly improved. The puzzles weren't as interesting this time around, which is unfortunate because that's a major part of the gameplay, but in turn, the characters were greatly improved. Uri was very clear that each of the games in the Strange Men anthology would have a different tone, and it was very noticeable in this entry. That makes me all the more excited to go try out the third entry, The Boogeyman. I hope to see you all again, and have a great rest of your day.